Now, I think there are really significant questions, right, about Israel's military operations and about Russia's military operations with respect to these principles. Russia has been targeting energy infrastructure, right? I think it claims that this is energy infrastructure, which is energy that is meant to support the Ukrainian military, but they're basically shutting out the lights for major population centers. It's quite clear that in fact they're either aiming at these energy infrastructure targets because they are civilian and they want to punish like Ukrainian civilians, or if there is some kind of military justification for it, these attacks fail the test of proportionality because the civilian harm that is being suffered outweighs the military advantage.
That would be going back to your example of how the Pentagon is near like a mall and how by approximate it's going to be a,
Exactly.
okay.
Exactly. Now, the Pentagon, you might make a different calculation. Wow, that's where all the cheap, that's where the whole brain trust is. And if we could take that out, we might win the war. So again, what's the military advantage of attacking the Pentagon? Could be very significant. The military advantage of turning out the lights in Kyiv, right? Like, what is the military advantage? I think that's much more speculative. In fact, I'm not convinced that the Russians even think there's a military advantage, that they are aiming at these targets because, again, they want to make the Ukrainian population, civilian population, suffer in the hopes that this will, cause the Ukrainian population to turn against the government and sue for peace. I mean, look, the Russians aren't the first to do this. Before these principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution were well established, rules of international law, that happened in the 60s, the 70s. Those rules were codified finally in the 1970s in the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols, rather, to the Geneva Conventions, the 1977 additional protocols. But if you think about the conduct of World War II, I mean, the firebombing of Dresden, the name of the kind of strategic bombing that the Brits used this terms, the Americans didn't, but it was called terror bombing. The purpose of the bombing was to terrorize the civilian population in the hopes that it would cause them to overthrow their government, to bring about, to press for a surrender, right? The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the bombing of Tokyo. Again, we were targeting civilian population centers, right? Now, again, by 1977, it's quite clear that this is prohibited. I think that's what the Russians are doing in Ukraine. I think if you look at some of the attacks that the Israelis have carried out, there are reports from Israel media saying there's a great story in a publication called 972 Magazine that talked about a couple of things. Number one, the Israelis were using artificial intelligence tools to help them identify targets, who was a fighter for Hamas. But more interesting and problematic for me was that if they figured out a guy was a Hamas fighter, they would drop a bomb on an apartment building and were willing to tolerate collateral or incidental civilian deaths of up to 15 to 20 civilians to kill a single, foot soldier. And in my mind, that is quite clearly incompatible with that test of proportionality. Yes, the guy's a good target. He's a fighter. But can you kill 15 civilians while aiming at one fighter? I think the answer is no. There are reports about attacks that Israel launched in densely populated refugee camps, right, using large munitions, dropping 2,000-pound bombs, to kill a single Hamas leader, knowing they had to know that dozens of people people who were civilians would be killed. So yeah, I think that we have seen in both theaters, both Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Gaza, some very, very problematic failures to comply with the use in bello. I think in the Israeli case, there have also been significant issues about the blocking of humanitarian aid. Another obligation, apart from the three principles that we've discussed, Greg, that states have is to allow humanitarian aid to the civilian population. And the Israelis have, sometimes it's been tighter, sometimes, but there have been significant periods of time in which Israel has essentially blocked any foreign assistance, including food, from coming into Gaza. And it looks like a campaign of starvation, which is prohibited under international law.